Okay, I think what we'll do is go ahead and, under official gaveling, I will call the meeting to order. Welcome, everybody. Let's start by approving the previous meeting's minutes. That's the meeting from December. Those minutes were distributed. So are there any questions or corrections to the minutes?
Yes, there was a portion in there talking about us, whether we should provide vaccines. I wondered if Hunter might be able to clarify that. I think we were talking about maybe requiring them as opposed to providing them, because I couldn't see any way that Angel Flight West would be providing vaccines.
Well, I don't have any opinion on it. I think that's up to the board. I think that it's a reasonable possibility that you might require proof of immunization for pilots and ultimately for some travelers, but I wouldn't presume to dictate that. I think it's a board decision that requires more discussion than just my opinion.
Yeah, I have that section. It says, Dr. Hansfield noted that the home testing is expected to be soon available and suggested the board may need to decide whether or not to provide vaccinations once the vaccine is readily available. So I think maybe it should say something like, decide whether or not to facilitate vaccinations, or we can take that sentence out altogether.
Or whether we're going to require them. I was just asking for clarification on what you said in that meeting, Hunter. I wasn't asking for a decision there.
Okay, well, it seems to me that as vaccines roll out, I wouldn't think that Angel Flight would take responsibility for actually providing or necessarily facilitating vaccinations. If there happen to be opportunities like Jeff Ogeman has provided in Washington State, that would be great. But you know, these are going to roll out over time. The importance of rapid testing becomes less crucial as vaccination rolls out. So it's, you know, one size doesn't fit all, and the policy may change as the months go by.
Yeah, my suggestion is going to be just to take that sentence out. I don't think we want to re-litigate, you know, what our position is going to be on level of vaccination compliance or what the board is actually going to do in this area. We do have some, as I mentioned earlier, Paula has made some progress in Arizona that we can share just as an approach that we can take from an operating standpoint. But I personally, I think it would be fine to take this sentence out and just approve the minutes, unless there's feelings otherwise.
I move to remove that place, that sentence, and with that sentence removed, approve the minutes.
And I second.
Thank you, guys. Anybody against this? Okay, we'll show that the minutes are approved, the corrected minutes are approved by unanimous consent. And I will turn it over to Sherry and Josh for mission moment and ops reports. Go ahead, guys.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Oops. So I'm going to start out with our mission moment. I did start the last board meeting talking to the board members about the Santa flights that we were going to do. At that point, we hadn't flown them yet, and we have many visitors today who might not know about it. So I thought I'd share just a little bit about it. Towards the end of last year, we came up with the idea to adopt some families for the holidays. We knew that many of our families were struggling. Many of their medical appointments had been canceled or rescheduled or pushed back. Getting to treatment was difficult. Some were afraid to fly, even in a small plane with another person. And so they were having a rough time of it. And of course, many of them are already in an economic difficult position, and COVID didn't make it any easier for them. So we asked our pilots if they would like to help, and we had plenty of pilots. We knew that we could fulfill some wish lists. So we reached out to some families, asked if they would like to participate, and we came up with 13 different families in 9 wings. Many of them really were grateful. Of note, we had a couple of the families that we had picked whose caregivers, their main caregiver, their main breadwinner passed away suddenly just right before the holidays, that making that even more difficult for them. But one particular note that stuck out for me was a dad who I spoke to. He had to pull over to the side of the road. He was so emotional about getting some toys and gifts for his children. He was a single dad of a 6-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 6-year-old who is very, very ill. He had just recently gotten custody, and for a variety of reasons, this was going to be the first Christmas these kids ever had. And he was not going to be able to provide any gifts at all for them. So finding out that this was happening was pretty exciting for him. As you can see on the slide, 13 families and 9 wings. There were 38 pilots. We got the pilots hooked up with a wish list. There were some who weren't able to fly or didn't want to purchase gifts but wanted to contribute. They gave us gift cards. We purchased the gifts. So for the rest of the pilots, we sent them with the wish lists. We asked them to go out and buy those gifts, to wrap them, and to fly them, and we were not disappointed. I hope that gave you all a little idea of the joy that was spread across all of those states and all of those kids last December. Many of us have kids of our own, and we know what Christmas morning was like. And for some of these children, this was a really special year. By the way, we gave the parents the option of bringing their children out to the airport to meet the pilots and see the gifts, or if they chose to, they could come out on their own, get the gifts, and take them home and pretend they came from Santa Claus. Every family wanted to bring their children to the airport because they wanted their kids to experience the generosity of the pilots. So it was a great experience, and we're hoping to replicate it in this coming year. Lessons learned, we know some things that we'll do better. It was a great experience overall. I'm going to give you just a little wrap up of 2020. Some of it you already heard, but again, for our guests, I'll repeat it.
Hey, Sharon.
Yes.
Sorry, I just wanted to recognize you and the team for putting that program together. As you kind of wipe the tears from your eyes, I was watching the chats kind of scroll across the screen. Lots of support for this, and I think it's really touched a lot of people. And importantly, those who needed it most. So thank you very much for that.
Thanks, Rich. It was a challenging year for everybody. I mean, that's a given. Everybody knows how the pandemic has impacted the world. So COVID threw Angel Flight West a curveball. The good news, I feel, is that we were able to catch that curveball and not only continue doing our mission, but taking some of the extra time that we had because of the downturn in missions to work on some long overdue projects. The staff worked on updating the database. We had some pretty messy data there that got cleaned up. We worked with Stefan on ways to make VPoids and Zendesk, a couple of the tools that we use for mission ops to make it better, and always making it better. Hopefully makes our job easier, allowing us to do more missions with less time. Our biggest project this year was, thank you very much, Zach, implementing the new waiver process. Of course, Zach and his team put together the waiver, gave us the guidelines that we needed to follow. But implementing that was a big project. Stefan did all of the heavy lifting, as he often does, and we thank him for that. But I also have to give kudos to my team, who spent hours and hours going through the waiver, going through each process. It was a little bit like playing Jenga. You know, every time you made one change, something would topple over and you'd have to put it all back together and start again. So it is going really smooth. The biggest catch to it all, and it's a pretty small one, is getting the waivers from those who have no access to electronic waivers. So I know it's hard to believe, but they're out there. They don't have a smartphone, they don't have internet at their home, they don't have an email address. So we worked out a process for that, and it's working okay as well. And then of course we had our COVID relief flights. You've heard all about them. Just a recap, 507 flights moving over 40 tons of product, PPE, water, diapers, food. We flew, I can't remember the number now, I feel like it was 11 tons of fresh produce, which sounds amazing and not like something Angel Flight would ever think of doing, but it was effective and the pilots loved it. We did 215 of those personnel flights. About 150 of them were due to the generosity of our partners at Alaska Airlines. Thank you, Carlos. We also strengthened our relationship with Southwest Airlines, and the balance of those 215 were flights were flown on Southwest, and those were personnel that were going to hospitals across the country that needed the extra help. One of the benefits to the COVID crisis was our relationship with some new partners. One was strengthening our relationship with Southwest. Additionally, of course, it strengthened our relationship with Alaska, which is pretty hard to do because it's pretty strong to begin with. We also made relationships with groups like Project Cure, the Colorado Hospital Association, bringing us another new board member, Benjamin Anderson. Stop the Bug, which if my team is watching, they're probably laughing because frequently during the chaos of the original relief missions, I always mistakenly called it Be the Bug, which was apparently not an appropriate thing. And you know what, during all of that, we also managed to continue to fly our missions for those passengers who were going to medical treatment. So all in all, I feel like 2020 was a great year for Angel Flight, and I'm looking forward to an even better 2021. Just a quick wrap up of the week, because I'm going to give one this afternoon as well. But I feel like the week went well. Many of you know that I much would prefer to be in person in the room, giving hugs and sitting down and chatting together. But this worked very well. We were able to reach so many more people. On Tuesday, the Mission Ops team put together a little skit for those of you that happened to be there. It was amusing at times, I hope. Our fearless leader, Josh, appeared in a cameo role and caused some laughs. So that was giving an overview of how a mission intake is done, and we got some really good feedback from people, from pilots who didn't realize how the process works. So I felt that was great. On Wednesday and Thursday, we did a portion we called Creative Thinking. How can we help you? And we really just did an interaction with pilots. We did breakout rooms on Wednesday. We did not do them on Thursday. We had a smaller group, and we just did idea sharing. And we're putting all of those together, and we'll share them with you later. So that is my wrap up for 2021 and for the mission ops portion of the retreat. Thank you all. And Stefan, as usual, will handle the metrics for me. Those of you that know me know metrics are not my favorite part of this job either. I've learned to tolerate them.
I
Thank you,
think she
Sherry.
just doesn't want to do the metrics because they're not really very good.
Not at all.
So as we've done in the past few board meetings this year, we're not going to focus on the rightmost column, which is the goals that we had set for ourselves for 2020 for obvious reasons. And we're just going to ignore those. That's what we usually focus on. But I just wanted to direct your attention to this column here, which is the year-over-year change, just so you know kind of what's happened in 2020 versus 2019. The being down about 30% has been pretty consistent, and that's both in terms of our missions scheduled and missions flown. So I would say for all of the years that were, all of the months rather, that were part of the COVID period have been about the same, and that's been pretty consistent. So the cancellation numbers are really very difficult to interpret given a variety of different things that are different about the types of missions we did this year, pilots who didn't want to fly in this circumstance, and so forth. So I'm also just going to kind of ignore those as well. There's not really a lot that we can learn or use from that number. And then the other thing I'll just direct your attention to is the membership dropped significantly, and that is a result of one of the ramifications of implementing the new waiver structure. So we purged a number of members from our role. Josh alluded to this in the opening. So this is kind of our new baseline going forward. We are continuing to acquire members very well. We're doing a better job of onboarding them and a better job of getting them engaged thanks to the dedicated member services person. So we're hoping to build that number back up again with a more engaged group of people. So I think that's the top line on the metrics for 2020.
Stefan, I have a question about the drop in membership. Is that reflected right now in the AFID's records site or reports or whatever?
Yes, going forward, that's a snapshot kind of thing, but any reports you see for periods after November of 2020 will reflect that drop in membership.
I guess the membership list, it has been updated to reflect those people that have fallen off then?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Stefan and the ops team? I just wanted to say one quick thing by way of, not to put a happy face on a difficult situation, but I guess I'm going to put a happy face on a difficult situation. The whole Rona thing was obviously a huge impact on operations in 2020, but I think the pivot that the organization did in two ways was critical to leaving Angel Flight in a really strong situation in 2020 in spite of everything. And the two pivots were, one, almost immediately getting on top of the budget and the funding situation to ensure that we could continue to fulfill our mission through difficult times. And by the way, this was in April when nobody really knew how long this was going to go on. It was kind of thought to be maybe a 2 or 3 month thing, and it's turned out to be a year and much longer, probably a 2-year kind of run. But that pivot was really critical in revising the both the budgetary expectations and also the operational expectations to match that. And the fundraising side of it was pretty critical to keeping us on track. And actually, Rafe and Kelsey will talk a little bit about that in the next segment. But the other pivot, which Sherry talked a little bit about, was shifting to flying PPE and other essential supplies as part of pandemic relief, and then continuing to be able to fulfill for most of this time essential medical transportation missions. We did shut down for a while, as everyone knows, but we came back. We had pilots who were willing to step up and step in. And I think Stefan, not to counter your observation on the lowered cancellation rates, but I think it actually does illuminate something. I think it illuminates that there's a core group of essential medical missions that actually don't cancel because they're just that important. And being able to have pilots that are willing to step up and fly in those conditions, in those situations, was really important to us getting through. So that's my happy face on what admittedly was otherwise a year of significant declines in metrics, but we got through and we got through well. So with that, I'll turn it over.
Can I just say one other thing?
Yeah, please.
So this is also normally when we would be talking about what targets we've set for 2021 and 2022. And so Josh and I have done a little bit of work on that. And essentially we've been pretty conservative. We've really assumed that the current status is going to last for quite a while longer. And that after that, when hopefully things become more normal, that there will be a rather gradual ramp up as healthcare facilities get back up to speed and patients get back into treatment and so forth. So we've kind of been pretty conservative about looking at what might happen this year.
Thank you, Stefan. Okay, I'll turn it over to Rafe and Kelsey for the financial review.
Just real quick, Rich. We've already covered most of it, but I also just, as we talked about in the executive committee, want to set the table a little bit in terms of priorities and where we're going here. And I won't get into the full review that we did on Monday, but I think it'd be good to set the table. And like everyone has said, and for you Hamilton fans, I miss being in the room where it happens. Miss seeing everyone, but this has been a really great week. So I'll just start with the highlights from this week real quick, and then I'll kind of update our status in terms of where we're at to set the table for our budget discussions and a lot of our committee initiatives to kind of give big picture. The other thing I will say is normally when we're in the room where it happens, we get to meet each other and learn more about each other. And that's among my favorite parts of the annual retreat because I'm always impressed and inspired by our fellow volunteers, our patients, our partners. We get a lot of folks in that room. Hopefully, and maybe later, we'll have some time to do those introductions if we end this meeting earlier. But I know a lot of guests that are in the room may not know who the board members are and who the staff are. Henny has done a great job. If you look in the participants list, you can click that on the bottom of labeling folks that are either board members or staff. So you can take a look there when you see people talking to know where they're coming from. And then again, like I said, I think I know most of the folks in this room, but for those that I don't, my name is Josh. I'm the executive director of Angel Flight West. I'm really proud of what we've accomplished in an extremely difficult year. And I'm not going to review all those things that people said, but I will say that at a time just where it's been tough for everyone, me personally, losing my mom and having kids that are climbing all over us and trying to tutor them in every subject and trying to remember what it was like to do middle school math. And then being frustrated with our political climate, the handling or the mishandling of some of the restrictions and testing and vaccines, all of it. We had riots right up to the door of our office at one point in Santa Monica. We had our office flood. I mean, you name it, it happened in 2020. And it was really easy to get frustrated during all of that. But one thing that I loved and I will always love about this organization is they're always willing to roll up their sleeves and be part of the solution and not contribute to any of that. And so from our staff, our boards, our volunteers, I just want to say thank you to everyone. It felt really good to be able to do something day after day that felt like you were trying to contribute to the solution instead of add to the mess. So just wanted to start with that. Thank you. Again, pivoting to something new is not without challenges. And we learned a ton this week. Thanks to everyone. We've had really good feedback and reception from this virtual conference. Again, I think I'm not alone in a lot of people wishing to be there, but we had more attendees than we've ever had at an Angel Flight conference. We almost had 200 folks over the course of this week catch part or all of the sessions, which, you know, for those of you who don't know, that's about 10% of our total volunteer staff population. So that's a really great number, and we learned a lot from them. And we, just like we do with every annual retreat, we take those and start to implement them and improve our processes. Part of that week included 6 safety seminars. I think that is a huge high five to the safety committee and Rich Pickett, who couldn't be here today. That was a priority that we've made over the past 2 years as an organization, is to continue to improve that culture of safety. And those were some of our best attended sessions. So really excited about that. Charity talked about the COVID flights and all that. And the other thing I will say, someone asked it in the chat earlier, all of these sessions have been recorded. So that's the other benefit that we have this year instead of other years. We don't have those big 3M papers with all the big markers, and we come and try to condense those notes. We've got it all here, and actually we can repurpose a lot of it, especially some of the more like training and tactical type stuff that, you know, we can put on our website and our knowledge base and let people view that at any time to get that learning. And I know I had a ton of emails saying, hey, I can't make this, a crazy week, I can't make a lot of it, but I'm really interested in all this stuff. Are you guys going to make it available offline? So even with those 200 attendees that I mentioned, you know, hopefully that's at least 0.5x more are going to be taking this in offline. So really kudos to, again, the staff for figuring this out. You know, Henny, poor thing, did not get into this job thinking she was going to become a Zoom expert, but she definitely is. So very transferable skill after COVID. There's a lot of great things you can do with these platforms and to connect us as well. And the other thing that I'm really impressed with, and I'll get into the review, but part of that review is our history. You know, I'm just looking through this participant list. We've got past board members, we've got past executive directors, we've got past wing leaders. We've got folks that have been here for over 30 years. And I really feel like what we're doing now is standing on the shoulders of all those folks and really passing that baton forward. And, you know, this started really as a replacement for the $100 hamburger. I know we joke about that, but literally that was the conversation that was happening in 1983 when we started this. And, you know, look at us now, 84,000 flights more, you know, continually improving each year and growing into this need, right? A need that we didn't even really understand when we were founded. We still don't really know really well now, but we're learning more and we're improving. And it feels good to be, again, part of that solution. And so with that said, and that mindset, I just want to remind us all that that's really why we're here. This is why we make these motions. You know, we're going to talk a lot about a big grant we have, and that's exciting. But at the end of the day, you know, it's those families that Sherry highlighted at the beginning, and I'm going to show a video here again because I think it's worth replaying. It's those people that we're doing all this work and investing all these resources and all this talent that we have to serve them. So with that said, I'll go ahead and I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I'll just do a quick recap again to try to set the table for the rest of our conversations here in terms of what we're trying to accomplish. All right, can everyone see this? Yes?
Yep, we got it.
I'm gonna see if I can do this a different way. Hold on.
you. Yeah, thank you. Good job.
Thank you, Angel Flight. Thank you, volunteers, ground angels, organization, administration, all of that. I just thank you. And you deserve praise for what you do.
I just want to say thank you, and I still remember the number of the plane, 019er.
Angel Flight West has meant the world to me. They got me there and back, even though my pilot wasn't available that day. A round-trip ticket was bought for me so that I could make it.
I was in a situation where I really wasn't sure how I was going to get where I needed to go, and all of you made it such a wonderful experience. I have honestly felt so loved and cared for and safe every time I had the experience with Angel Flight.
It's been a huge part of our story to have Angel Flight there to support us, and we really appreciate all the donors and sponsors and pilots and the team and all the work that you do for all the families. So thank you.
My experience with you has been so amazing. You all have been so nice, caring, loving, and supportive. I want to thank each and every one of you for all that you do for me and for others.
And I appreciate this greatly. It helped me get to my surgery and post-surgery return home, and I am grateful.
I just want to say thank you so much for all the donation that you guys have provided.
Would like to express our thanks to everything you've done in being able to get boxes down to the Hopi and Navajo people.
Thank you for making my donor's flight so easy.
I want to say how much I appreciate the Angel Flights giving me flights from here to Denver and Fort Collins when I was doing chemo.
I always said I just look for the nicest person in the airport, and I know it's our pilot.
So thank you, and heads off to all the Angel Flights team.
And I am forever grateful for the benefaction of Angel Flights West, but I owe a huge debt of gratitude to Angel Flights West and the pilots.
And this is my opportunity to express my appreciation to the Angel Flight people and the ground angels and the people in Santa Monica, because what you have done is to save my life.
So again, thank you to everyone. You saw it there from passengers themselves, and that's our focus all this week, today, and every day at Angel Flight. I'm not going to go through all of this because we've done a lot, but we just talked a lot about the need. And as we move forward, wrapping our heads around this, Richard Beatty and Bet both sent me and Ivan a great email about the need, both this need and also our need to better define that and reach those groups. We spent a lot of our early capacity dollars on those efforts, and obviously that activity has resulted in good results. But as we continue to scale and move, getting really good at that piece is going to be important for us. We talked about the annual retreat already. We've gone through the mission and vision and our target audience and a little bit of our history. Again, thank you for all that have been here, many of which have been here, if not the whole time, since the 80s and 90s, which is incredible legacy for our organization. And I know each of you could tell your own stories of how you've seen change. Here's a little bit of our history. You can see in there, our rapid development as we moved online and expanded into the wings there, and then in the late 90s, and then our relationship with Alaska Airlines coming there in 2003, and then really 2004 to 2014, organizationally, we kind of hit a little bit of a ceiling, and we were plus or minus 10% of that 4,000 flights flown. And then 2015, launching the Ascent to 8,000 campaign, and you can see that growth then there at that tail. This year's obviously thrown a wrench into everything, but as Rich said, it's taught us a lot too, especially about what our core mission is and those flights that aren't going anywhere, but then also all these opportunities to partner and become a true platform for other nonprofits that we can help with transportation and logistics needs. So we're excited to take those into. We're also excited to be in a spot where we can continue that growth and pick up from where we left off with these lessons learned. The Ascent to 8,000, for those that aren't familiar, again, launched in 2015, was more of the agile management method where we took our verticals, which is our Ps, our passengers, our volunteers, pilots, and drivers, our partners and healthcare facilities, and our patrons, our donors, and said, all right, in each of these areas, what initiatives do we think that can move the ball forward or enhance our results in each area? And we were really specific about those outcomes that we were going to measure, what it was going to take, who was going to be in charge. And we just did those period over period. And that's really what was responsible for that growth. And that's important because it taught us something that we're going to talk about in a little bit on what we want to extend. But, since we've done that, 44% growth overall is pretty great. We thought maybe it was going to be exponential, and then realized that we might bankrupt the organization if we continue at that rate, because we need the resources possible and do it sustainably. So we did it more incremental, and the growth was more linear, but still repeatable year over year, which has been exciting to watch, and a testament to the success of all those involved in helping us plan for that and doing the work. All right, so we already went over all of our missions now. We went over the effects of pandemic. We're going to talk about vaccinations a little bit. That's a big part of our path forward, but we're going to talk about that later in the committee meetings. We talked about these changes that came at board level over the last couple of years that have been implemented. We talked about pivoting to meet those needs. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time here either. I will say we are on still really good financial footing. Rich commented on this earlier, and we're about to jump into financials here shortly. But a testament both to planned gifts that some of our early members who are no longer with us have left their legacy with Angel Flight West. And then also just really prudent management by Rafe and Kelsey in the finance team to get us into a place where, unlike a lot of our nonprofit partners who had to be reactive and had to cut and or close their doors, we were in a place where we could keep our eyes on the long-term prize, and our board was really great about that, of letting things shake out and realizing that we have a reserve fund and realizing that we're here to serve and have a need, and that rainy day funds are for years like this. And then similarly, the development team rolling up their sleeves and getting super creative, and a lot of our donors being extra generous to get us to a place that we don't have to make steep cuts. We don't have to make major revisions to how we operate, but that we can continue on our long-term goal and not have to revert back to any other less than forms. This is a little bit of our team. I'll just kind of look at this briefly. You can kind of see how we're structured as an organization and who fills each of those roles. There's all the amazing team, very diverse group of people, ages, backgrounds, experiences, expertises. We've got a really great team here, and one I'm excited to continue on with as we embark on some really ambitious goals. So on that note, so for those of you who didn't see or haven't heard, at the end of last year, actually in 2019, Barron Hilton, who's a big aviator and part of the Conrad Hilton's sons, passed away and left his net worth to the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation, with the condition that with his funds, they add a new pillar of funding to their mix, which would be aviation. And so this team, which actually is just based up in the Valley here in California, researched a lot of different nonprofits that were involved in aviation, and reached out to Angel Flight saying they felt like we were best positioned for a large gift to make the most impact in the spirit of what Barron Hilton wanted. And so they reached out to Mary, and Mary outlined kind of what our needs were and what our plans were. And they said, okay, give us a grant request. And then a couple weeks later awarded us with a $1 million grant over 2 years. So again, a testament to navigating turbulent times that these types of gifts don't happen by accident. Obviously, the Conrad and Hilton Foundation has, a staff actually much larger than Angel Flight that handles their investment, does researches, does these programs, and holds nonprofits accountable to really achieve the objectives of the Hilton family. So for them to award us, this is a tremendous reflection on the strength of our volunteers, of our volunteer leadership, of our staff and team. That everyone should take heart and a pat on the backs that a organization of this caliber would trust us with those funds to be able to make some sort of return to the patient community that desperately needs this transportation to healthcare. So kudos to everyone. The reason I'm bringing this up, because I think it sets the table kind of for 2021 and our planning here. Obviously, this is when we approve our rolling budget. We do a 24-month rolling budget at Angel Flight, and we revise it annually at this meeting. And Rafe is going to get into exactly currently where we're planning on spending a lot of this money. But I'm going to get into just a little bit more of the goal. So Stefan mentioned, he and I have gone over some of these and tempered this. This is a very conservative approach based on the climate and based on a lot of unknown variables, right, of what transportation is going to look like after COVID, how comfortable patients are going to be, how comfortable hospitals are going to be, all those types of things. We do anticipate that that's going to come back. At what rate, we don't know. So these are the goals that we've mapped out for that. We're not going to do a deep dive into these right now because we've done that a little bit throughout the seminar, and we'll do it more, but I just wanted to see folks to see what that ramp kind of looks like right now in terms of our missions and our volunteers. So in our generic terms, our supply and demand. So overall, again, big picture, and what we've been successful for with that initial phase of Ascent 8000 largely has increased efficiency. As we've improved our reliability and sustainability, it's resulted in a lot of repeat requests. Yes, we've gotten a lot of new requests too, and the repeat requests also result in a lot of word of mouth and that kind of thing. So we're going to continue with that goal. Effective utilization of resources. We don't to use this gift invested in capacity growth initiatives means that when it's done, we can't rubber band back. So how do we do this in a way that's sustainable and scalable? So that's really effective utilization of resources. And that big goal, again, the 8,000 was based on what we were serving initially, which was 4,000, which what we had measured initially from our partners being about 5% of the total need. What would it look like to get to 10% of the total need? That's why that 8,000 number was picked. And I talked about our management method, and for those of you who can see me, my propeller behind me says dream big. I want everyone at Angel Flight to continue to do that, dream big, and keep our vision audacious. So these are the growth initiatives that were outlined by each of our leadership teams and kind of our different pillars. So I'll just go through these quickly. We've got these mapped out in the budget so you can see. But I mentioned earlier outreach and to the degree we can use technology to do our outreach remain our priorities. Obviously, we've in the initial Ascent to 8,000, Ivan assumed a new role. Outreach wasn't really a key pillar other than some grassroots efforts that were going on at the wing level. So we've enhanced a lot of those. There is some staffing that's included in there. There's a lot of technology in here. And the biggest part of that is while we've done a lot more activity, the measurement and the return of investment on that activity is still a challenge for us. We've been more of a service organization, less of a sales organization. So figuring out where our clients are coming from, where we can reach them, how we can find them, how we can differentiate ourselves in this market that's really cluttered. All the things that you always hear people talk about, how it's hard to give away a free resource. That is true. So a lot of those efforts in there are around those types of things. Technology, again, because we've been able to pivot in the pandemic is largely due because we are a virtual platform that people can plug into online or on their phone, and that we can really work from anywhere, and we have volunteers from everywhere. So leaning into that this is basically doubling down, and a lot of those technologies is what helps us with all those key audiences. So website was one of our first priorities on here. There's a lot of efficiency types of things, and then community. That's another thing that continues to come up conference after conference, is everyone likes being in that room and enjoying that community, and those ideas get flowing and people take ownership of the mission more. So to the degree we can do that, both in person but also online, we think we've prioritized to try to do and measure to see how effective that can be. Program operations. Last year conference, we talked a lot about the No Patient Left Behind, or the Patient Assistance Fund. We had 3 months of that to start the year last year. It was highly effective. So we're resuming that and measuring that much better in terms of how it affects cancellations, how it affects routing, how it affects reaching more passengers. Earth Angel Coordinator. Earth Angels has been a little bit of the stepchild of our organization. And so with more resources, we want to put staffing and focus on that, because it is a big part of our curb-to-curb service. And it does make a big difference both with our patients and our volunteer pilots. A lot of this training and video materials has just been something that's been lacking for a long time, that is needed. So hitting the refresh button on that, we think will be really important. Safety, we want to continue to grow that culture of safety. So a lot of that looks like more training modules and notifications. And then other initiatives that we can that helps pilots navigate those no-go, no-go safety decisions. And then that online community I talked about earlier. And as we saw in this conference, there's a real appetite for these safety resources and for the exchanging of best practices. So that's another priority for us there. I'll come back to organizational development. Again, we have to sustain this long term, so we have to get better at raising funds too. So some of this is some outdated platforms that we need, and some staffing, and then some focus on kind of long term and major gifts that you'll see there. Organizationally, like I mentioned earlier, I think we have a fantastic team. So I want to continue to prioritize development, training, and retention of that team. We want to still take that active leadership. Angel Flight has been kind of the benevolent big brother in the public benefit flying community for a long time. And it's time to kind of tell our siblings to start taking some ownership too. So we want to actively lead that, both within the national groups, but also with the lessons learned that we have here. We've got some more resources than most public benefit flying organizations. And I think we have a responsibility to share those, so that a rising tide can raise all boats. But we want to do that in a way that long term is going to benefit everyone and create more efficiency of scale. And then same thing in the sustainability and protection of our volunteers and organizations. Zach, the legal team, and those that have preceded him have done a great job of, as we've grown, of making sure that our risk factors are covered. So we want to continue to do that and invest where we need to in those areas. So that's kind of the big picture stuff. I'll stop there because we're going to get into budget pretty much on time. I think there's some chat stuff that came in here, just saying if there's any specific questions. A lot of kudos to the team.
Josh, this is so exciting. I put it in the chat. This is a really, really impressive presentation on a banner year in among difficult situations. Yeah, my mind's racing with possibilities, but now's not the time for that. I just want to tell you, this is so cool.
Well, thanks, Ben. That's the purpose of this week in general, is to get those ideas racing. The strength of Angel Flight West continues to be and will always be our amazing volunteers. And we're so blessed with the level of talent and passion that comes from that group. So look forward to working with you. I know the outreach committee is really excited to roll up their sleeves and get active with this. So really looking forward to working with you there. Again, I'll just say this now, and as things come through the chat, please don't hesitate to call us, email us. It's not just this week. We need help and ideas. We need it all the time. And so my cell phone's always on, my email's always open, so please do that. And I know the rest of the team feels the same way. It really helps to have other folks pulling on those oars with us. Sometimes we can get lost in the weeds, so pull us up out of there from time to time. All right, I think
Josh,
that it,
Laurel Johnson, can I add one other thing?
yes, please.
I'm not on the board, but I was able to go volunteer at one of the booths, and I had the pleasure of meeting Trevor Moody. And there were a couple of missions that are not being reflected on the mission reports. And I just wanted to share with you, I was personally responsible for, I think, 3 missions that got canceled, and it was due to weather and because we couldn't find another pilot, and really was factors beyond our control. But there are at least 3 missions that are not on that report. And they were during holiday. We partnered, Brad Schuster, who was a volunteer that I coordinated and recruited at the event, came, volunteered, and we flew packages for Christmas to partner with Ronald McDonald House. We did several of those. And then we also recruited for everybody in the Washington wing. I found out who were the cancer patients, who were the regulars. And when we needed N95 masks, we got on the phones. I pounded the phones for 9 hours. We got N95 masks donated for every one of those patients, and Trevor got those out. So we were able to contribute in a way that didn't get reflected in the financials. And most importantly to me, I called St. Charles and said, I'm coming down. I have 300 pounds capacity in my plane. I've only got 1 mask, but is there anything else I can bring you? And they didn't need anything. Well, ironically, my husband ended up having a stroke. He's high risk. He needed an N95 mask. And the mask that I flew down, he ended up wearing into the hospital for his treatment. Wow. So maybe it didn't get reflected in the numbers, but it was incredibly important. And it was important to our family. And thank you so much for everything you've done. And thank you, Trevor.
Laurel, I'm so glad you're joining us today, and thank you for sharing that. For those of you who don't know Laurel, she early on in pandemic really rolled up her sleeves in the Pacific Northwest. And as I'm sure you saw, we chased a lot of different opportunities because everyone was so eager to help. And the PPE shortages that we were able to do in Colorado and a few other places, Laurel led a lot of those in the Pacific Northwest. And I'm so glad that you shared that story and that your husband is okay. And Trevor was right there in that group too. And the whole actually Washington Wing leadership team and Ivan, there was a lot of opportunities coming up. So thank you for sharing that. And that's reflective too, not just of Washington, but in multiple wings. We had a lot of that grassroots effort going on. And I wish I could take time to explain all of them. And maybe we should on another time where we can record this and have more time, because it's easy when so much is happening, easy to forget all the great stuff that happened. So thank you for sharing that, Laurel. I really appreciate it. And Trevor, thanks for all your work as part of that process too.
Yeah, and thanks, Laurel, for reconnecting, and good to see you on the call here.
And Josh, thank you, not just for the retrospective look at 2020, but for a pretty clear-eyed and optimistic view of kind of reestablishing as we move through 2021. Thank you for that good setup. Shall we move to the finance side with Kelsey and Rafe?
Sure. Yeah, I just want to reiterate that. I want to say thanks again, Josh, Sherry, Laurel, the entire team. Too many people probably to list through, but I just want to say thank you for terrific work under very challenging circumstances to get us to where we are today as an organization. So we'll spend a few minutes talking about 2020. I think you've heard a lot of it, but we ended in a really good place. Again, to put a happy face on an otherwise difficult situation, we ended in a really strong place as an organization financially. And we'll talk a little bit about that, and then we'll spend some time talking about our 2021-2022 budget as well. So, Rafe, hand it to you.
All right. Thank you, Kelsey. And thank you, Josh, for queuing this up. When the pandemic hit in March, the first thing we did was create some financial scenarios to see what our range of risk was, knowing that we were very likely going to cancel the Endeavor Awards, being really uncertain about charitable giving and how this was going to impact the economy and the stock market, and really having no sense really until mid-January of how our year-end giving was going to look. And, I'm glad to say that, all things considered, we had an incredible result to this year. And I'm going to hit some key points. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the budget and what our plans are for the next 2 years. And so, first and foremost, our operating cash was at $1.35 million. $1 million of that is the Hilton grant, which we're going to spend over 2 years. So we expect that to go away over the next 24 months. But that still gives us $350,000 to operate our cash flow for the year, which is excellent. And then you can see our reserve fund, $2.44 million. And one of the big questions for us was how much of that reserve were we going to eat into this year? And the answer was actually very little, in fact, none. And I'll talk about that in a moment. If you look at our cash and reserves over time, the orange bars are our reserves. And you can see this big jump in December was actually getting the $1 million Hilton grant. And hopefully no one will charge me for every time I say Hilton during this presentation, because a lot of what we're doing has to do with that. And then you can see here, one of my favorite trends is looking at our ramp upward of our cash and reserves balances year over year. And we really didn't think we would be going up in this year. So really incredible result for us. I think, as we were planning in March, there were a couple of things that, that we had to put on hold. We had to put our $100,000 investment in the passenger assistance fund on hold. We put an outreach position on hold. We really committed to working largely in status quo until we had a sense of how this year was going to go. And I think one of the great gifts of that $1 million award is that even with the continued uncertainty for this year and the next, it allows us to move forward on these critical initiatives that Josh shared a few moments ago without necessarily, the fear of whether or not we're going to have to draw all those funds from reserves. So what a great donation, what a great opportunity for us to keep on that trajectory. So hitting some high points on revenue and expenses, our cash revenue was $266,000 behind the prior year, not including our $1 million grant, because that really relates to this year and next year, and not including a one-time trust that we received in 2019. So essentially, we were about $266,000 off. And that's pretty much, not being able to replace the net revenue from the Endeavor Awards. Fortunately, we applied for and received a PPP loan, which we expect to have fully forgiven. And that also helped our bottom line as well from a cash standpoint. On the expense side, our total expenses were about 6% below budget expectations. Clearly, we had savings in travel because we weren't going anywhere in the same way. We weren't having these conferences in person. We weren't moving around the region in the same way. So a lot of savings there. As I mentioned, we scaled back on paid flight expenses right away. We scaled down our costs on professional fees and general operating expenses. We also gave up an extra office space that we had in August that, created some savings there as well. And we'll continue to create some savings in 2021 and 2022. And so if you look at our reprojection, somewhat, I can't say that we were just wizards of projecting the results. I think some of it is, a bit coincidental. But we ended up at a shortfall of about $241,000 compared to a budget of a shortfall of $248,000. And when we adjust that for our cash benefits, we take out the $150,000 from our PPP loan, and we take back a non-cash depreciation of about $40,000. And our net operating cash loss, not including Hilton, of course, was about $50,000. So considering a year where we thought that number could be $500,000, $250,000, we were very fortunate to have a result as good as that. And that's, of course, not even including this $1 million grant right here, or the $188,000 gain on our investments. We don't count that because it's not really part of our operations, but it does build our reserve. And then coming down to in-kind flights, we had projected that we would end up about 30% below our original projections, and we were almost right on the mark there. So ultimately, an incredible result for a year with so much uncertainty, and that great gift of having the ability to continue to invest in 2021 and 2022. And I just thought I would pause there and see if there are any questions, or Josh or Kelsey, if you wanted to add anything before we look at the budget.
Yeah, I guess I'll just add one comment, which is, big picture. If you take everything that Rafe just shared in context, it was really an exceptional year, right? If you strip out the Hilton grant and the investment performance, which was very strong, I mean, to go through what this organization has gone through under the circumstances in which it's gone through it, and to be really, from a cash perspective, down $50,000 that's pretty incredible. And it's really a testament and a hats off to the entire team, both on the development side and the management team and the entire team coming together to really find ways to tighten the belt, so to speak, and keep the organization in a strong position financially to continue on with its mission, and hopefully to grow the mission over the next few years. Josh, anything to add?
I wouldn't add anything. You guys have covered it really well. Thank you.
Thank you. I did want to add that at this time of year, we normally make a recommendation to allocate funds to or from the reserve. Given that we were essentially in a break-even position, the only transfer to reserve that we would contemplate at this point would be regarding the timing of the spending of the Hilton grant, because clearly we're not going to spend that all in the next few months. We're going to spend it over these successive months. And so at some point in the future, the finance committee is going to potentially come back and say, hey, let's take, 2/3 of that and just put it in a money market, instead of operating cash. So, but our normal transfer to reserve that we would vote on at this meeting, we're deferring for the moment, just because we didn't really have a surplus there that we would allocate other than the Hilton funds. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears and talk a little bit about our budget. And so I'm actually going to start with the Hilton worksheet because, I have to stop share again. Hang on just a moment. I'm going to start a little bit with the Hilton budget. I know Josh already talked in broad strokes about, the three pillars essentially of how we're going to invest. And this is how it shakes out from a number standpoint. The gift was pledged and received in 2020, so it all gets credited to 2020, and then we spend it in 2021 and 2022. So externally, we show potential deficits for those periods based on that spending. And that's something that we will be explaining to our funders pretty much in every grant application that reflects our results for 2021 and 2022. And that is typical for nonprofit organizations that get these kinds of large grants that cover multiple years. And so, it's something we're used to having to explain, and it's a great problem to have. So the way it works out, and I'll just kind of walk through, and I'll try to keep it mostly high level. We talked through every line at the finance committee, and perhaps that would be excruciating for the board meeting. So I'll try to summarize. We're making some investments in general expenses, largely computers and equipment. We're also looking at some pilot recognition supplies and some coaching and professional development. We're bringing back our paid flight expenses to $100,000 a year, which we're very excited about. We're making some investments in staffing, most of them coming online towards May and July. An Earth Angel coordinator, a regional outreach coordinator, a communications manager, and an additional mission coordinator starting at the beginning of 2022. And this is the area for us to really watch in 2023 and beyond, because once these funds run out, we have to grow our fundraising sufficient to cover the ongoing costs. So we know that we have 2021 and 2022 to increase our fundraising to sustain what will ultimately likely be about $300,000 in annual cost and investment that stays with us after these funds are expended. And that's something, you know, that we'll have to keep on our radar this entire time. A lot of our investments in year one are really going to show up. Sorry, I was getting a call and had to decline. So a lot of our investments in year one are going to show up in this computers network technology line, our website enhancements. We're really looking at automation and additional tools to help streamline our work and help us scale to grow and serve more and more as part of the ascent to 8,000. We're also looking at doing some integration on the donor management side, really trying to use technology as much as possible to make our work as efficient as possible. We're also looking at doing some promo videos and some orientation and training videos and some other materials for our donors, our volunteers, and the people that we serve. And so you can see, you know, ultimately we have about $440,000 that we expect to spend in both years, and a little over 10% that's just going to assist our infrastructure and bottom line. And I think, you know, if you pull these expenses out of the budget, we would be very much, you know, our services would be actually pretty, I don't know if it's the right word, not scaled down, but we would have been in a holding pattern were it not for these funds, and really operating in potentially a further deficit without this investment in our infrastructure, as well as some of the costs that we potentially would have had anyway, like a portion of paid flight expenses, certainly not on this level. So, I mean, the Hilton gift just keeps on giving for us as far as strategy and planning for the next 2 years.
Question for you, Rafe.
Sure.
So this represents how the money will be deployed and where the investments are best made. How should we think about the outcome side of this? And you started to just touch on it in your most recent comment, in that, you know, so when we report back, for example, to the Hilton Foundation and potentially even ask for, you know, a continuation of funds, we'll want to show that it's had a net positive impact. So I'm thinking back to what Josh showed in terms of what the, you know, annual increase in flights and volunteers and everything will look like. Do we know what it would look like given that this money is going to be spent, or if it weren't going to be spent? Did the previous numbers include this investment? If so, if, you know, somehow we're going to want to look at the outcomes that this incremental spending had and hold ourselves accountable to that, both for our own internal management, but also for the benefit of our donors.
I think there are a couple things, and I will want to turn it over to Josh to talk a little bit about the sprint model and how we assess and how we pivot when we make these types of investments. I think, you know, were it not for this grant, we would have tried to build some of this work into our annual budget, but we may not have built it in until 2022 or beyond. We really wouldn't have been able to take action like this. We wouldn't likely have been able to allow for any of these positions to begin. So I think our ramp in growth and missions would have really stalled for a couple years and stayed at about the same rate until we could actually have the net revenue to make some of these investments.
So great question, Stephen, and one I would encourage the board to continue to hold us accountable on. Kelsey asked a similar question in the finance committee in terms of what we're doing. So as part of this shift that we talked about in 2013, 2014, 2015, and part of the reason that Hilton responded so positively to our grant request is we always try to measure to outcomes. So we have some core metrics that we define and with the board and with our volunteer leadership at the wing level that talks about, you know, for each of our kind of verticals. So for example, for outreach, that looks like missions requested, so the numbers of requests coming in for our flights. And then under that, we have new requesters, we have repeat requesters, we have patient communities, and then we have some other kind of communication type things that we do with specific groups like National Association of Social Workers. So those are all metrics that we have, and then we track, whether those are increasing or decreasing and how. And so for each of these unique projects, we're defining those on which goals, which metrics we want to move, and then we see the effect on them, and then we would go back to Hilton at that point and say, we were able to bring in X amount of new requesters, which resulted in X amount of new flights, which resulted in X amount of new people served. And what that allows us to do, and what it allowed us to do in the first iteration of this capacity growth campaign, is then to go back to other funders or other groups and say, hey, this is what your money accomplished. We feel like we could accomplish X, Y, and Z with this much more funds. Or, if we were to go to the Walton Family Foundation and say, hey, Hilton Foundation did this. This is what we learned. Would you want to come alongside of us and we can accomplish this? So for each of those verticals, we have those metrics, and it's not by any means what we think is maybe an exhaustive list. And so that's again where we would encourage the board and volunteer leadership to speak up, to say, hey, and actually I've already seen in chat several of those ideas come by, which is great, because then that allows us to measure it. And so, and then the other important part of any of these initiatives that we are going into, like, let's say hiring a communications manager. Okay, great. So our communications need to be improved to what end? We always want to, we want to be outcome driven. So what verticals do we want to attach that, and what are responsibilities and goals do they have as an employee to come in here and, help us move the ball forward? So that's probably a overly verbose description, but I hope that answers what the question is that you're looking to in terms of, X amount of dollars equals what in impact. And those are those operational.
I think it answers it retrospectively. My encouragement is we set some targets now in terms of what we think this is going to do for us, just so we have a starting point in understanding whether we've been effective with the funds and they've had the desired impact. And that may be reflected in the plan as it exists already.
Yeah.
But it's certainly helpful to be able to say, hey, with this incremental $1 million, we were able to have this many more, and name your favorite metric, things take place.
Yeah, for sure. And we can share those after the meeting. I probably should have made it more of my presentation, but we can share those metrics that we've created. And then, what we haven't done really, visually at least, is tie the outcomes that we're hoping from each of those investments. So that's something that we can come back to the board and the membership with.
And Josh, one other quick thought for you, and I know you guys are actually looking at this, but formalizing it might be interesting. As we try to make these investments to scale, one of the measurements that we want to keep an eye on is what is our total cost per whatever unit of measurement we want to use? What is our total cost per mission booked in at the top? What is our total cost for mission actually delivered at the bottom? I know that you guys track that, but it's a good measure of our success in scaling if that's going down.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that was a key part of our early one that we want to continue. The one we landed on was organizational cost per arranged flight.
Yeah.
And in the last 5 years, that has gone down from what was about 260 to about 190 now.
Good progress.
I wanted to add that, I've worked with Hilton for a number of our different clients, and this gift is much more flexible than what I've seen with other gifts. And it may be the nature of who in the family designated it or how the money flowed through the foundation. But, they're not really holding us to this model and, specific line items, and very often they do. So it really gives us maximum flexibility to pivot if we see certain investments or, if we see things that are not paying off the way that we'd like them to pay off. And also, if we don't happen to hire an additional mission coordinator January 1st and hire them July 1st, they won't think of it as having not met the goals of the grant. So having that kind of flexibility is rare and really fantastic.
Yeah, and Rafe mentioned it earlier. I'll just reiterate it. Because this was designated as operations support, we do have some flexibility. So we did build that into the budget a little bit to offset some of our typical operating costs as we do these. We didn't want it to be like, all right, we're just gonna get lazy and not do anything. We wanted this to be a transformational gift, as it should be. It's the largest gift that Angel Flight's ever received. But that is part of that, because the other big concern we have with this, with the ratio of this investment with our overall operating budget, the risk is, you make a lot of investments, we get a lot of activity started, but then, when that money's not there anymore, obviously the rubber banding back would be detrimental to the overall organization. So we wanted to do it in a way that we felt like, we can grow all these other things to sustain it. So that's how we're thinking it, and that's how we're trying to plan.
Thank you, Josh. I'm going to bring the overall budget up, and it's also compared to the 2020 actuals, just for, and actually, if you look at the PDF version, it goes back to 2016, because I like to see trends. But I think, on the expense side, you're largely going to see increases related to the Hilton grant. We have some overall assumptions on the revenue side that I think are important to highlight. And so, we're looking at about 10% growth in missions off of 2020 actuals for the next 2 years. And it could be, since we budget on a 24-month rolling basis, when we get together in a year, we may be updating 2022 if we're hopefully into a more state of normalcy with the pandemic. We may see a spike in 2022 that we couldn't necessarily count on in our budget for this year. So that may be a conservative number. For our revenue overall, we mostly budgeted steady state because we still believe it's a time of uncertainty for us. We have no idea what the longer term impact is going to be of this pandemic, how it's going to affect foundation giving, how it will affect individual giving. So we tried to keep our budget largely in line with our actuals from 2020 and be happily surprised if we exceed it. And so that was generally our theme. When you look at our main fundraising event, you can see our plan for 2021 is that we're going to have a virtual Endeavor Awards, and we're going to have an in-person golf event. And when you look at 2022, our assumption is that we're going to be back to in-person events. And so, you'll see both our revenue and expenses in 2021 and 2022 reflect the assumption that the majority of 2021 is going to be more at this, pandemic style operation, and 2022 is more return to normalcy. And so, you can see in our Endeavor Awards numbers how much we typically raise when we do this event in person. But we are seeing, we saw some good emergency support in 2020, people who gave to the Endeavor that was canceled, that was converted to an emergency gift, and also an emergency campaign that helped us quite a bit. And also our golf event outperformed expectations as well. So we think this number is pretty conservative, and overall, our assumption is that we'll be able to match our fundraising of 2022 in 2021 with moderate growth, very little growth in 2022. On the expense side, I've labeled everything here that's related to Hilton. So, the big increases that you see in miscellaneous expenses are largely tied to the Hilton investments. On mission services, same thing, it's paid flight expenses. On occupancy expenses, you actually see those numbers go down because we gave up that office space. It'll jump up again because every year occupancy costs go up. It'll jump up a little bit again in 2022. In our personnel costs, the jump here really is between 2021 and 2022, and you see the annualized cost of the investment in some of these Hilton positions. And then in professional fees, you'll see a spike in 2021 from the Hilton investments, particularly in technology, and then see it go down a little bit in 2022. And then for travel, again, assuming very little activity in 2021, and then 2022, back to what we would consider a more normal movement around our region, our conferences, our board meetings, reaching out in person to the regions and, doing our fundraising and our pilot outreach and our outreach to patients. And so you'll see it's no coincidence that, the deficits planned for these 2 years match the funding we have for the Hilton grant. And the way it pencils out from a hybrid cash and accrual balance is that in the first year, we have about a $38,000 shortfall. And then in the second year, we have about a $38,000 surplus. And the finance committee was comfortable with this level of uncertainty. We presented to the executive committee and they were comfortable with this as well. So now we're presenting it to the board for any questions, comments, concerns, anything I can help clarify.
Rafe, I just have a question about the office space because you scrolled through it too quickly. With the added personnel coming in this summer and then early next year, is there a plan to reconsider that office space, or is that completely off the table now as far as what operations needs?
I'm going to turn it over to Josh in a second, but I do want to mention that one of the things we considered was actually going to a virtual office environment and giving up our office space entirely. When we were looking at our different financial models, I think we found, it's not necessarily ideally an ideal situation, but I think we found that we were able to function remotely. So, perhaps there's a combination of remote and in person, and some of those positions may be located out of the area. We are in a month-to-month with the airport, so we actually could make a change there at any time, which is also good. But Josh, anything you want to clarify there?
No, other than the feedback from the staff through this, as we've talked about resuming, is exactly what Rafe said. Kind of people are asking for maybe more of a hybrid model. And now that we know that we can do it, it makes a little bit more sense. I was probably the one a little more reticent moving fully virtual. I just feel like seeing patients and volunteers face to face is a really critical part of being part of a missions team and feeling that ownership and responsibility. With that said, as Rafe mentioned, we are looking at some geographic staffing, and something that we want to explore in this growth plan is seeing what it would look like to decentralize our staffing and put them in different areas to have more local expertise and local touch, which we've seen in the past, both from staff travel and other, to be effective. So that's one of the regional outreach positions. That's one of the goals that we have behind that. So I don't, just like every commercial real estate, this airport has lots of empty offices right now because a lot of folks are doing the office-less work experience. So those opportunities will probably be there here for at least the near future, and we can look at it. But right now, we aren't currently planning on expanding space.
Okay, thanks.
I have a question. This is Bet. Overall, the budget looks, terrific, and I appreciate the projections that are quite modest in terms of uncertainties that abound still with us. But I'm curious about the projections for number of missions. And I wonder, Rafe or Josh or someone, if you could speak to that, the assumptions built into that. Is that just kind of an instinctive feel for what we might be doing? I think it was about a 10% growth. Is it based on conversations with, requesters, major requesters, with passengers, with understanding pilot availability during these times? Someone speak to the question about that. And then I have a second part question, which is whether kind of off the top, what % of our expenses are variable based on missions versus fixed? I think both of those kind of go hand in hand.
I can take the second one pretty quickly, but I'll probably need Josh and Stefan to jump in on the other ones. I mean, I think one of our challenges is that we don't have a lot of variable costs. We certainly could give up our office space, and we certainly could eliminate travel, which is largely already eliminated from the 2021 budget. But really what it comes down to is employment costs for us. So, I think if our missions stayed low, we would look at our investment in an additional mission coordinator in January of 2022 and probably hold off on that if the mission count doesn't support adding another person. But in terms of like the other scalable elements, most of our costs are pretty well fixed.
Yeah, that was another learning for us in 2021. Not that we didn't already know it, but when you're looking to cut a budget, for us, that our only really costs are people, technology, and space. And so we were able to cut space, and as Rafe said, a couple other line items around moving people around. But after that, you're really looking at staff reductions when you're trying to save significant amounts in the budget.
And in our projections, I mean, we looked at multiple scenarios. We certainly put off, hiring where it indicated that. And I think with our Hilton grant, we would do same or pivot again if we saw results that were not favorable in some of our milestones for 2021. So, the first big milestone for 2021 on a fundraising level will be the Virtual Endeavor Awards. And will it bring in a couple $100,000? From what I've seen with other agencies that have shifted to virtual events, I was reluctant at first to think they could be successful, but I've seen that those that can support are continuing to support, even if they don't get a meal or in-person entertainment with it. So I feel definitely warmer about virtual events. But I think in each stage, there'll be year-end fundraising, which we, by then we will have gone, all the way through the year. So our pivots will have to occur in 2022 if we see we're falling behind. The other thing that we'll look for is any no's from foundations that typically would fund us, because a large no, like $30,000, we'll have to make up for elsewhere, either on the cost side or additional fundraising elsewhere. And I think what's important is that we have the financial infrastructure in place to be able to track this stuff very closely and be able to make those changes. And having a 2-year budget really helps us. And each of these milestones are mapped out month by month in our plan. And so when we felt compromised in the pandemic, like everyone else, we went through and we called multiple emergency meetings until we felt like we were comfortable with our risk at each stage in time. And so, I imagine we'll run 2021 much the same way. But I still think there's a question open about the first question, really, which is about the mission growth and whether we feel, where those numbers come from and how we feel about them.
Yeah, so initially we were much more aggressive actually in 2021, and Stefan can tell you that I kept trying to hamstring us back. I just felt it was important with a lot, that you touched on most of the variables that we're experiencing. We do hear from our healthcare partners that it's a little bit still start and stop. They have their own internal numbers in terms of ICU capability and whether or not they're doing elective surgeries versus non-elective surgeries, et cetera. And we've experienced that, pretty heavily in 2021. We'd have these wave of cancellations every time, restrictions were increased. And then the same thing on our supply side, 60% of our pilots wanted to continue flying passenger flights. The other 40% wanted to wait until either numbers ebbed or vaccinations were available. And now, why we're prioritizing vaccinations is for that reason, to get folks back up and flying. So all that to say that relatively modest growth that we're expecting in 2021, there wasn't an algorithm that we plugged in to say this is what it equals, because we just don't have all the data and information there. So that was mostly instinct, and then what we're hearing from our user groups that informed that level of growth.
I'll just say mathematically, the way we came up with the numbers was for the first half of this year, we're expecting 2020 numbers, except for January and February, which were pre-COVID. We're discounting those by the 30% that we've been experiencing. And then for the second half of this year, we're projecting 2019 numbers. So that's how we came up with those targets.
Thanks, Stefan. Any other questions on the budget? Happy to answer them and appreciate all the questions so far.
Rafe, I don't know if you want to talk about this now or we want to talk about it in Finance Committee and bring it back to the board. But Rafe and I have gone back and forth on the second round of PPP. We actually qualify for it, but it's more because of our in-kind numbers decreasing than our actual budget numbers decreasing. So the question of whether or not to apply for those funds, either at the 1% or hoping for forgiveness, has been a bit up in the air. So we're looking for some guidance there. You know, we've gone both ways on in terms of, well, we qualify for it, so let's apply, but also, like, is that a good look on the organization when we've had a good financial year and just received a significant investment? So would be, I don't know if you want to talk about that now, or Kelsey and Rafe, or if we should take that offline in finance.
Hey, Josh, Rich, what's the timeline on this? I think it's a very appropriate thing to have board input on, and if we're on a short timeline, I'd like to dedicate maybe 5 minutes to that now. If we have more room in the timeline, I think we could turn it over to the Finance Committee to come back with a recommendation. What's that situation?
I think the timeline is short. I think, we have no idea what additional relief may be coming through, but much like in the first round, there was a point where people stopped taking applications. I think, we'd want to tackle this in the next week. Okay. So I think if we can dedicate 5 minutes to it, to get the board's perspective on it, it would be really valuable for us.
Let's do that.
I'll offer a first a point of view on this because we've wrestled with this question at several other organizations with which I'm involved. And the very consistent outcome in those other organizations was a judgment as to whether the organization actually needed the money, not whether it could get it, but did it need it. And the litmus test was how did the leadership or the board feel if a headline was written 8 months from now saying, hey, they took a PPP grant, but they had just received, in one organization's example, a multi-million-dollar gift and were more than flush with cash. So it was, in the end, it was a sense of what's right, because if you're taking the money, then the restaurant down the street may not get the money. And how do you feel from a PR perspective? Whereas the argument of, well, we qualify didn't carry the vote in any of the organizations with which I'm involved.
I think that's a great point.
Well, my thought on it is that, looking back to what I perceive to be the intent of the PPP, which is to preserve employment for people during, some unspecified period of time. I think we've done that with the first PPP loan, and we have preserved the employment of the existing staff. To me, it's a much harder case for obtaining a PPP loan in order to maintain, I don't know, your volunteers or your cadre of volunteers. I'm not seeing what the direct relationship is between obtaining the loan funds and maintaining this part of the operation.
If I could add just one quick perspective to that, when we went through this in the first round, we had some similar conversations. The biggest difference was the unknowns at that time were so large. The potential for variability in our giving, in our operations, every component that we measure and worry about in terms of keeping this business going and meeting our mission, all of that was up in the air. So I think there was an uncertainty that is a little bit mitigated now. Not that we don't have continued uncertainty, but we know that we can, get through this this kind of pandemic challenge. We have a whole different set of circumstances from a financial standpoint. So I don't think we have what I'll call the cover of uncertainty that was useful to us the first time around.
Yeah, and if you're taking the temperature of the other board members, I agree wholeheartedly.
Does anyone have a counter view to offer that they think we should consider?
Maybe I'll play the devil's advocate, Rich.
Sure.
And I really am saying this to be the devil's advocate and for conversation. But I wonder as a board, as fiduciaries, how we would answer the question if it were ever posed to us: why didn't you take the PPP funds that were made available to you as an organization? If at some point over the next year or the next 2 years, we fell short significantly in our fundraising, we think there's less uncertainty right now with COVID and the reopening and vaccination, but there are still a number of uncertainties that remain. So how would we answer that question as an organization if it were posed to us, if we were in a worse financial situation in a year or 2 years from now than we're projecting?
Well, I'll offer one answer, and that is, as part of the PPP loan application process, the board and the CEO or managing director has to attest to their assessment in the current timeframe as to the financial need. And there's some words around what you have to attest to. And if on a balance you couldn't today attest to that, then you can't apply for the loan. And what we're really saying as a board potentially is, we can't say that we really need the money, which is essentially what you're attesting to. And that being the case, and I like your question, Kelsey. I think it's a good one to ask from a fiduciary perspective. Our defense would be, at the time, given what we knew, the grants we had just received, the patterns we saw, et cetera, it was our assessment that we could not attest to what the government was asking. So there is an answer to that question, but I do appreciate what you raised, because we have to do our fiduciary jobs here for sure.
Stephen,
this is Mark. Just on a separate observation that's connected to this, the last PPP expenditure, a local food delivery company in the Encino area called Encino Delivers took the PPP for its small company. It ended up that it actually didn't need it, and it came forward with the fact that it didn't need it to keep its employees, and they redistributed it to local restaurants. The reason I bring that up is, Josh, again, I do believe we should not accept it, but I want to give a sort of internal alternate opinion. Josh speaks about how we can help other public benefit flying organizations. So, if we did decide as a board we wanted to take the PPP, we could examine at a later date if we wanted to share it with other nonprofit flying organizations that might in the future or later this year or already be in trouble.
This is Benjamin. I go back to mission. What's the mission of this organization and what's our purpose? And we've had hospitals. I'm connected to 45 or so rural hospitals in the Mountain State. And a lot of them took the PPP loan, and then it was, they figured out it was a really advantageous thing to do that on the back end. And some of them didn't, and I guess regretted it. But I think with where we are financially, even if we knew it would be forgiven, like in some future stimulus bill or whatever, but we don't need the funds. And I'm witnessing financials here that indicate incredible stewardship of by an organization of its funds, and in a strong position for future financial reality. I'd say pass on it. It isn't the primary mission of the organization to protect other organizations that are perhaps struggling in ways that Angel Flight's not. The primary mission of the organization is to get access to, I should have memorized it by now as a board member, but essentially is to get people the care that they need, and to meet needs. So I may sound heartless with that, but I think I think we're in a position where we don't need it. Even if we knew it would be forgiven, even if we knew there was no interest, I think we're still in a situation where we should decline. That's my vote.
Well, look, I think I appreciate the sense of the board, and I think Josh and Rafe and Kelsey, the sense of the board to me feels like this is something we should pass on at this time for the reasons stated. I won't go back through them. So let's take that advice on board. We do need a motion for the approval of the 2021-2022 24-month budget. So if there's any further discussion, we can have that. Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
Second.
Rich, Matt will move to approve the 2021 budget as
Okay,
written.
Matt moves to approve. Second.
I'll second.
Thank you, Kelsey. I normally just ask for any opposed because it's easier. Any opposed?
I do have a question. Then by default, we're also approving the Hilton grant expenditure by extension to approving the budget. Is that correct?
Yeah.
That's correct.
Okay.
Thank you, guys. Okay, so I will record that, or we should record that as unanimous approval of the budget. Thank you, Kelsey and Rafe. Terrific work during the year and terrific work on the forward-looking budget. We're running a little bit behind, but I think the discussions have been really terrific. And I think Josh's review of 2020, the forward look to 21, and the recap of the week was really worthwhile. So I'm not going to try to shoehorn us into the 11 o'clock time, but I do want to try to be judicious with the remaining time for the committee reports, because we do have an executive session that we're going to need to go through. So if we could keep these committee updates very tight, that would be real helpful. Can we talk from a legal and tech standpoint about the privacy policy that we have adopted? Stefan, are you going to take that?
I can certainly do that. We had proposed a revision to the privacy policy, which is on the website. The revision is just simply based on the fact that the last draft was from 2012, and some recent legislation, both at the federal and state level, and also some additional online marketing that we're doing that had some requirements for the privacy policy. So the revisions reflect all that. Paula caught a couple of points at the executive committee, which we've since corrected in the draft that you're looking at. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Not the most exciting thing in the world.
It's kind of a pro forma thing. We wanted just to make sure the board was aware of it, because technically it's a policy revision, which is appropriate for the board to see, but it's it's something we need to do, and I think it's non-controversial. Is that fair?
I certainly consider it non-controversial. Okay. Yes.
I think that's fair, and a big thanks to Zach and the people at Buckalter for helping out with it.
Thank you, guys, and thank you, Zach, and your firm as well. I know you had some other contacts you used from your legal committee, so appreciate that.
Yeah, I just want to say Carl Berner from our Seattle office is the one who did the work, not me, so he should get the credit.
Terrific. Thank you. Mark, we'll move on to development.
Wait, do you need a motion on that, Rich?
Oh, yeah, well, I guess can't hurt. I'll entertain a motion to adopt the new privacy policy.
So motion.
Any further discussion? Second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any opposed?
They get to know you, the better they can. No.
Okay, we'll record it as unanimously approved.
Hey, Rich.
Yes, sir.
Sorry, my phone picked that exact moment to start ringing, so I missed who moved and who seconded.
Oh, that's right. You have to record those.
Laura seconded it. Laura Lang.
Laura seconded. Who moved it?
Garrett did.
Thank you, Garrett.
Really? 20 or 30.
I need to say that.
Okay, guys. Mark, on to development.
Thank you very much. Henny, can you just pull up the slides for me? Thank you. So I'll try to do this as quickly as possible because it's been gone over twice during the week. But if you look at the review of 2020 versus 2019, the Endeavor Awards, obviously the money was down on that because it didn't happen. But oddly enough, we still raised $210,000. We converted the efforts to raise money toward the Emergency Assistance Fund, which got us $156,000. So between the two, we actually did very good in that area. You heard the Golf Classic did better than before. Grants were a little bit high, we're up 3%. The board giving was a little bit low this year. But when we get to the year-end giving, between Giving Tuesday holiday and the year-end appeal, it was a net gain from 2019 to 2020. So that's very good. Next slide. So the lessons learned are, efficiency in what we did. We were forced into efficiency this year for obvious reasons. The Hilton Foundation, as you saw in the budget, we're going to generate some technology to help us in this with donor metrics and new donors and a strategic move to number of gifts and revenue per donor. Next slide. So let's look at it. Yeah, thank you. So the 5-year goal, again, you saw a little bit of this in the budget, is the event. The Endeavor Awards is going to be virtual this year. And the other thing is, I'll talk a little bit about the Endeavor Awards. It's also going to be free this year. Because it's virtual, we feel like we can open it to a much larger audience. So the event's going to be free. That will achieve, some of the goals that why we do the Endeavor Awards is we want to communicate the great work that we do so that we can bring in a bigger audience. So doing it free, we think is going to have a huge impact. Just quickly, some of the things that will be at the Endeavor Awards this year. Greg Kinnear is going to be one of our hosts. Pilot Pete from The Bachelor. Red Bull is doing a big stunt. They're doing a skydive. They're doing a helicopter thing. Sean Tucker is going to be involved. Kirby Chambliss is going to be involved. The astronauts are going to be involved. Jake Owen, the country music singer, thanks to Textron, is going to be involved. And also this year, we're going to be honoring, and Josh talked a little bit about this, the founding members of AFW who decided they wanted to do more than a $100 hamburger. We're awarding the 3 inspiration awardees that we were supposed to award last year, this year virtually, which is Cy Robin, who makes the antennas on every airplane, Tammy Jo Schultz, who managed to land a Southwest airline with an uncontrolled engine disaster. And Jonice Spizzo, head of UCLA Health Systems and previously head of University of Washington, and has been a big supporter of us this year. As you know, we usually give an Endeavor Award to pilots that have gone above and beyond. We usually give 2 or 3. This year, we are going to recognize every single pilot that's ever flown even one flight, because everybody needs to be recognized. And now that we have a virtual platform, it makes a lot of sense. So that's sort of quickly the update on the Endeavor Awards. Is there another slide? I think that's it. Nope, that's it. And that's a quick update on that. Actually, I'm just going to share one interesting screen. I don't know if you guys can see that. I think this is just an important point to remember always as we move toward growth this year. Okay, there you go. Any questions actually on development? Josh, did I miss anything? Henny, did I mention anything? Miss anything? Again, really a huge hands up for the development team. Mary, Henny, Kim, the grant writing team. I mean, it's just unbelievable what they've pulled off for this entire year. I mean, nobody wants to be in the, development and going out and begging for money all year. Can you imagine doing it in 2020? They were out there doing it all year. Unbelievable.
Great work. Great work. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. I just want to say quickly, it's a true testament to our team. We were able to communicate all the amazing things operationally that was going on. And yeah, it's just total team effort. So thank you all again.
Well, thank you, Mary. Outstanding work. Great contribution to a tough year. It achieved a great result. Let's move on to outreach. Ivan, are you going to take that?
Yeah, I'll take it. So just briefly, I know we're short on time, but I wanted to share my screen. Since the end of year numbers are in, as we can see, the new requester numbers are also in. So we did fall short of about 40% of our target. You'll see we started the year off more or less where we wanted to be. But come March and COVID, we took a dive down. We weren't immune to that. We know the healthcare facilities were focused on COVID. Doors were shut, events canceled. So that was the bad news for outreach. But moving on to the good news is that we were able to pivot and gain new partnerships. We spoke about the partnerships with a lot of the PPE distribution groups, some of the other groups like Search Dog Foundation. One of the newest groups is the Guide Dogs for the Blind. We flew our first mission for them on January 2nd. You'll see there a cute photo of one of the puppies in front of his very fancy Phenom, flying from Oakland to Las Cruces. Again, as we mentioned before, we've been searching for a lot of these partnerships, some false starts and some not getting the traction that we wish we had, but we've been having some luck with a lot of new partnerships such as Guide Dogs. And also good timing to pivot and continue our domestic violence outreach campaign. We've expanded that recently in the last 2 months. We've reached out to all the state coalition and coalition members. We've been particularly successful in Oregon, where we were able to reach out to individual coalition members and have received a great response leading up to a number of meetings and virtual presentations. So we're looking to replicate that success in other states. We've started the year with running Facebook ads for pilot recruitment as well as passenger and requester ads. We're doing that through the $10,000 we received in ads credits through the Ads for Impact program that we were accepted into late last year. So we have up until April to use those. And already those ads have totaled to 53,282 people. They've generated over 90,000 impressions, and we've received several requester leads from those. So that's some good news there. And then finally, just a few dates of some upcoming presentations and virtual forums that we are participating in. And I'll end it at that.
Thank you, Ivan, appreciate it. Moving on to safety, Josh, I think you distributed Rich Pickett's notes to the board.
Yeah,
you want
me to put those up?
Yeah, if there's anything that you want to talk about, I know Allie's on the call too. Allie, is there anything that you wanted to highlight from Rich's report?
No, his report was thorough and he's just on it. He's super engaged and doesn't really need me too much.
Well, feel free to jump in here anytime, Allie, but I'll go ahead and go through this. Rich, for those of you that haven't met him, is our safety officer. This was his first full year in the role, and he did a fantastic job. He flies professionally and actually is flying at the moment. So he provided this for me. I will also say in the budget, you heard Rafe mention it briefly. we wanted to sustain that safety position full time, and being in the pandemic, Rich donated most of that back to the organization to help us cover that gap in our budget. So all around, an amazing addition to our team. We'll just go through these really quickly. The board last year made a motion to restrict nighttime VFR unless you're an instrument current pilot. That was implemented over the summer. One, both procedurally, but also timing wise, there wouldn't be as much nighttime VFR. So we felt like that was a better timing. That has been widely accepted and adopted well. Wing safety meetings locally, we had to cancel because of COVID. And you can see the impact here that he talked about in terms of safety. The safety committee played a huge role in our risk mitigation procedures and our protocol, moving passengers during COVID, which you can see some of those there. And there's a whole host of resources in our knowledge base. For those of you who haven't seen it, we can provide that afterwards. And then Rich, in person, was constantly following up with people on masking questions, on other issues that were happening. Anytime we got a safety report or a photo where we saw some of those protocol being loosely or not adhered to, following and giving warnings for those. So the compliance we had, thanks to Rich and all the wing safety officers, some of which were on this call, thank you, was fantastic. Pilots in general were very understanding. Again, always impressed with our volunteers' adaptability and willingness to help. We received some initial pushback when we tried to implement some of this stuff, but for the most part was really well adopted. And obviously the most important metric for safety are, serious safety accidents. And we are very thankful that we had no serious safety issues in 2020. We do have a safety committee, and part of the reason what Rich does is to resolve minor issues. So one, reporting was way up, which is really fantastic, especially since we were flying less missions. But none of the issues that we had were very, very serious in nature or in danger of safety. So each of those were handled really well. You see some of these here that we've had electrical issues. We had a cockpit opening in mid-flight. And then this week, the safety officers, for those of you who didn't see it, did a fantastic job too on the safety seminar. So that's something we're going to actually continue into 2021, is doing these virtual safety seminars with our wing safety officers to keep that cadence in addition to our newsletters. Talked about all those already. Here's 2021. Communication and that culture of safety is key, so we want to keep that drumbeat moving. So the safety newsletters will continue. I just talked about those safeties webinars. We had started in 2020 with AOPA ASI. For those of you who don't know, we require a safety course specifically on public benefit aviation when you join Angel Flight that we created with AOPA ASI. We want to create an additional one of those. It's more about the mission mindset and the go, no go mentality. And so that's on our plans for 2021 as well. Whether or not we require that in orientation remains to be seen. And then we are also redoing the orientation videos, because it's been a number of years now since we've done that. And safety will be a much more prominent focus in those videos as well. And then as restrictions lift, Rich is already planning to go to wings, but hopefully we can get some gatherings and do some in-person safety webinars and Q&A. So that's safety. Did you want to also talk about vaccinations here, Mark?
Yeah, I do. I want to turn it over to Paul. I just want to say quickly, though, that I think Rich and Allie, you and the safety team have kind of shifted the focus of safety to pilot engagement around prevention, reporting, knowledge, as opposed to trying to legislate changes in behavior or safety. And we've had a little bit of legislation, if you will. The night night VFR is a good example of that. But you all recall the kind of difficult discussions that we had around what the focus of safety ought to be. And I think Rich and Allie and the team have really shifted the focus to where it belongs in an organization like ours. And Rich is very committed to it, and I'm glad he's with us. And sad he isn't here today, but glad that he's with the team. I'm going to turn over to Paula to talk a little bit about an effort that has been happening in a couple of different places, sort of centrally within Angel Flight West, to see if we can get some traction on using our status as medical transportation to qualify our pilots for vaccination as soon as possible. And we had some traction on that up in Washington, I think thanks to Dr. Ogerman, which we really appreciate. And now Paula has been working, is it with Ben, Paula, that you've been working down in Arizona to try to figure this out?
No.
Well, I'll turn it over to you so you can tell us what's going on, because you've had some success down there. Go ahead.
Well, the good news is the county is the gatekeeper in the state of Arizona. So set up like Jeff has in Seattle Children's wasn't really working for us here. The county did grant us the 1A status. So our pilots can go to the website and sign up for these vaccinations. Tim Barrios, the Arizona wing leader, went through the process and was able to do a template for other pilots to follow. We're still working to maybe get a letter either from the county or from Banner Health, who happens to be administering the vaccinations in the Phoenix area, to see if we can't have all the ammunition for our pilots to take to their appointment should anyone push back. I targeted the main area where our pilots live. So that would be the greater Phoenix area, Maricopa County. I also targeted a teaching hospital. It's kind of hard to figure out which hospital to go to, but I happen to have some good luck there, and I had some connections that date back decades. I want to emphasize the importance of, having people be able to go out there and really develop and work these connections. I've developed deep, abiding friendships in some of these connections. It's really important work, really time consuming. I hope it's replicable in the other counties in Arizona. I'm hoping we can take the permission or the status from Maricopa County and to other counties, but by far, Maricopa is the biggest bulk of our pilots. I want Tim, if he's on the line, maybe to present, if we can get his template up, so you can just take a quick look at it and see if he has anything to add. I'd like to throw out, if anybody wants more details, it seems like it's going to be a little different in each state, but it can be done. I got this together in a week. You have to realize the hospitals are first and foremost dealing with a pandemic. And I've just had people be just lovely on the phone. It's Mayo Clinic was bad, but otherwise all the hospitals have eventually gotten back to me and pretty much explained that it all has to go through the county. And I was just lucky with Banner University that they are the administrator, so they're directly connected to the county, and they were able to take our cases directly to the county.
Paula, I think you raise a good point, which is that at least here in California as well, it's mostly county controlled. In fact, it's all county controlled. So it seems like it's county by county type battle.
I wouldn't recommend going to the health department or even to the county. If you can find who's administering those shots, that seems the better way. The health department's going to be inundated with calls unless you have a brother-in-law who works at the health department or something. I would recommend trying through the hospitals, but that's just my take on it.
I guess where I was going with my question was just, I was curious, what narrative did you find successful in getting whoever the authorizing agency is? What made them understand that this was a reasonable 1A kind of appeal?
Yes, Jeff was extremely helpful in this, providing that letter. He also provided some more backup information emphasizing why we qualify under CDC criteria. But actually, what really helped the most is the hospital hopefully is familiar with Angel Flight West. They know what we do. They understand why we're requesting this. I've not had any pushback except from Mayo. They understood. You know, I tried to say, look, these people are in close contact with your patients for maybe 3 hours. That's a lot of exposure. We need to minimize risk there. And there is absolutely, you know, I didn't even have to sell it because Angel Flight West thankfully sells itself, and I hit people that were familiar.
Josh, I have some additional comments on this.
Yeah, and Ben, real quick, let me just kind of state kind of where we're at with this in general as an organization. So Dr. Ogeman, who couldn't be here today, and he apologized because he wanted to update on this too. As Paula said, CDC guidelines, we are definitely in the patient delivery chain, and all of our hospitals that use us know that. So what's happened was, you know, we've done it in Washington through Seattle Children. So anyone that wanted to be vaccinated can be. A couple of people are on the line that had questions about that, and I'll follow up with you if you missed that opportunity. In Colorado, Denver Health is now doing that too. And so Dr. Ogeman's advice for us as a staff was to try to go through the hospital, because even within counties, they're given some latitude. And so he sent a bunch of emails to his CMO network that I've been following up with, and our team has been following up with, and we've gotten traction on certain ones, but not activations yet. So that is one train. The other train here that Paul is talking about that a lot of other actually volunteer pilots have had success with is navigating their own county, taking their Angel Flight documentation, et cetera. And several throughout this week have asked for a letter, which Dr. Ogeman and I had already worked on. So we'll make that available to everyone that says, hey, according to CDC, X, Y, and Z, you can fill in your name. We'll put it on our letterhead. So any volunteer can try to navigate their own system like that while we're still trying to provide these opportunities institutionally. And so far, both in Washington and Colorado, they've made it pretty simple for us to collect names and important information and schedule those individual pilots. So obviously this is a big safety and organizational focus that we want to put on as we move through the pandemic here. Is we want to make sure that for the safety of our patients and our volunteers, that everyone that is desiring a vaccine can be vaccinated as quickly as possible. So something we want to continue to impress upon in terms of importance. And Paula, thank you for navigating that for Arizona, because that's great. Next new step to get more of our pilots vaccinated. And Ben, I know you're active in this too in the rural area, so I'd love to hear what you have to say too.
Yeah, we've been dealing with this exact thing with Project Cure at a senior level. And they actually were running so short on volunteers that we weren't going to be able to get the PPE that you all have been, that our pilots have been shipping out. And so initially I tried to go, you know, through the governor's office, and I just ran into but just, I mean, we couldn't even get a call back or a response on it. What we figured out though is the people that have been receiving PPE from you are very, very loyal to Angel Flight. And I'm not talking about crossing ethical boundaries and skipping lines or anything like that, but there is, as Paula or Josh, you've mentioned, some county an opportunity to make decisions at a county level around the interpretation of the vaccine of the governor's EO, and you know, there are conflicting messages coming from the state. You know, vaccine equities, stick with the guidelines, and out of the same side, I mean, the other side of the same mouth, it's don't waste a single dose, right? And so what we know is that the recipients of the PPE you've been delivering for 10 months, when I call those CEOs and say, the folks still delivering your PPE, 5 shipments out this week, need vaccines, they say, well, if we're tossing doses, we're going to toss them in their arms. So tomorrow at 1 o'clock, how many can you have here? And it involves a drive, you know, 2-3 hours, or in your case, it would be a flight, but it involves a commute. But we're finding that they're very interested in doing that. And I don't think we're breaking laws in doing it. This type of thing is happening all the time. The governor says he doesn't want a single dose wasted. And so as long as there's flexibility and willingness to commute, we can help with some Colorado-based pilots too. So I like the conversations that are happening at the state level, but also, I mean, we had one hospital, shouldn't have done this, but inoculated the school teacher staff in his whole county. Like, you didn't want to waste doses, and that can create some perception issues too. But there's a lot of gray area in this vaccine distribution stuff, and so I think just let's have some conversations about that. And yeah, I'm not suggesting we rob a 70-year-old of their vaccine, but if vaccines are going to go to they're calling people in to get vaccinated because they've met as much of the target market as they can, let's get them in the arms of pilots that are delivering them PPE. And so they're open to that, and I just need to make those phone calls.
Hey, Ben, just one other, in early conversations with Dr. Ojimona Children's, he said, and I don't know where this came from, but he said that there was a 20% sort of community allocation that they were working on, and it wasn't clear whether it was mandated by some higher ups or it was a children's policy, but that 20% allocation of the vaccines made it easier for him to navigate the allocation to Angel Flight. I don't know.
It may be. So the public health department and the hospitals are working so closely together because it's often the public health department is a half-time nurse in a rural community that's 20 hours a week, and they do WIC and vaccines normally, but they can't handle this kind of volume. So the hospital is really the one that's administering it, and so there are public health departments, or the community allocation, so to speak, goes to the hospital so often in a rural context anyway, because they're the only ones that really have the staff and to do it. And so, yeah, I'm on the vaccine equity task force. I'm of course, very passionate about making sure that we do this as ethically as possible. If there are doses that are going down, we would rather them be in the shots be in the arms of pilots. And so, if we can network that, and we see, in Holyoke, for example, she was able to locally determine Project Cure staff as 1A frontline folk, essential, really essential to the healthcare workforce, and so that's how they're doing it. So,
I wonder if it would be helpful to take just a couple seconds to describe a little bit more about how the system is working in Washington State, because it may be applicable elsewhere as well. So if you'd like me to go, so basically in Washington State, there's a state process, a state online site. You can go through and answer questions about your current age status, et cetera, that then gives you a certification in terms of your level and priority. And if you meet the criteria for a group that's currently authorized, such as 1B and above, you then are authorized to go to any of the many sites that offer vaccine, hospitals and others. When this system was created and first publicized a month ago, it was criticized in the media for a reason that in fact can make things work well for Angel Flight, I believe. It was criticized because there is absolutely no cross-check on the truth of the answers people give. They have no linkage to whether you're giving your correct age, whether you really have the underlying conditions, whether you live in a multi-family setting, and all that sort of thing. And so it was criticized because people could break the line with it. There's no evidence that's been reported, at least, that that's actually happening very often. But I do think that for most pilots in Washington, if perhaps your location isn't conducive to getting over to Children's Hospital in Seattle, I would say go online, and maybe this works similarly elsewhere, go online, certify your status, and just check off the boxes that in fact say that you're a provider you're in the linkage of healthcare provision for patients, and you probably end up getting classified 1A or 1B and currently eligible. So it's something to keep in mind. I don't know if other states have anything quite like that.
Thank you, Hunter. And look, thanks for this discussion. I think it's really helpful. I do want to move us on because we have an executive session that's critical that we have to get to. But it does feel like we've kind of got two things. We've got some local grassroots kind of stuff going on, which is terrific to continue. And then Josh has a centralized effort that's going on. And Josh, I'm just going to assume that you're going to keep the organization up to date on developments that can be facilitated by the Angel Flight Santa Monica headquarters.
Yeah, and in the meantime, I'd invite others that are in different states to help us. If you learn of something new, please keep us apprised.
Terrific.
I'd just like to circle back to two really quick points. Pima County, which is the Tucson area, has opened up a medical transportation category that is unique in the state. So we would clearly fall under that. Jeff's letter is so valuable. He helped me so much. It opens doors when you approach the hospital. It is not considered proof when you go to the injection site. So keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Trevor, do we have anything on board management?
Yeah, I'll just give a quick update. There's nothing new, but it's but I'll just take 1 minute. So as the board knows, but others may not know, 2020 was a big push as we faced a number of board members that were hitting the end of their second term, and so we're going to be timing out from the board. So we brought on 6 new board members over the last 2 board meetings. That's out of a maximum board of 21. So it's a big add, and almost all of them are on the call here. We've got Stephen Elop from Washington, Bet Gardner, I think from Oregon now, if I have that right. Dr. Jeff Ogerman, whose name's come up a lot, but he wasn't able to make it, but has been great on the vaccine stuff. Ben Anderson, also very active in the public health area out in Colorado. Laura Long, Hawaii and Montana, and Jim Ariglioso in Oregon. So that's been great. Our work is definitely not over though, as by my math, we have another 8 board members who are timing out over the 21 and 22, 2021 and 2022. So to keep the board fresh and fully staffed, we're going to be recruiting some more. And in fact, just a PSA that Rich and I are going to be doing a session at noon today, so in about 40 minutes, for folks who are who may be interested in board service. So I would just say, please join that if you can. That's a separate Zoom after the executive committee. So that's all I had, Rich.
I can follow up with you. I've got a suggestion on a board member in Nevada.
Yeah, great. Thanks. That's awesome. Yes, please do. And that's what I should say is, folks who are interested, folks who've got ideas. I know some of you have already expressed your interest, and we're tracking that. But over the next couple of years, there will be more openings. So the fact that we're at full capacity 21 board members right now doesn't mean that there won't be a number of openings over the next couple of years.
Thank you very much, Trevor. That concludes the board session, with the exception of the executive session, which we'll move into now, unless there is other new business, or unless, Josh, there are any closing comments that you'd like to make.
No, thanks again. I appreciate the direction and approval of the budget so we can move forward, and we'll continue the monthly cadence of updates, both on our instrument panel for general fund, but also for the Hilton expenditures, much like we did when we were reporting, for those of you who are on the board, the capacity growth campaign funding. And then additionally to the staff after this week, we'll continue to revise strategies and updates, and we'll send that out to the board too for review and feedback based on both what we learned this week and also as we plan for the grant and as we're moving forward in 2020. So just wanted to got a lot of guests on the line too. I want to thank everyone for your engagement and contribution. I loved all the chat coming through and those raising their hands to volunteer and do other things. So really appreciate it. And thanks so much. And we'll see you hopefully at noon or 1 o'clock too, as we wrap up. Those links are in the chat if you need it, or on our website on a pop-up. So thank you, everyone.
And Josh, before you go, on behalf of the board, thank you for navigating us and getting us through a turbulent 2020. Thanks for the vision for 2021. I know there's still a fair amount of staff on the call. Thank you to the Angel Flight staff and all the volunteers who have attended this call, and we owe it all to you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you on behalf of all the staff, Rich. We really feel well supported by our volunteers and board. So we're lucky as an organization and excited for a new and better year.
Terrific. Okay, then we'll ask all non-board members to drop off the Zoom, and we'll give that a minute, and then we'll move into our executive session. Thanks, guys.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
See you.